Welcome to the Times of Industry show. I'm here with one of my favorite guests, truly one of the most charming and honest commentators in the alternative media world, Bob Moriarty, 321gold.com, one of the earliest websites on gold, on commodities. He has another website he's going to tell us about. Best-selling author, got a lot of books out there that I think you should definitely take a look at, and Bob will tell us all about them later on. I love interviewing him because it's always a treat, and I'd love to have him back. Bob, first of all, how's the summer in France? It was very hot for me. I was just there. You guys had a big heat wave.
It got pretty hot to the extent that it gets very cool here at night, so you could pretty much put up with hot temperatures. But it's up to, I think, 98 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like 160 degrees centigrade.
Yeah, I did a day drive with my wife from Nice to see the lavender fields in Provence, and it got to 45 degrees Celsius at the midday. It was really, really bad.
It was hot.
Yeah. So many other hot topics, not just the weather, but, let me ask you some of the things that are interesting to me. I took a look at all of the testimony, the 2-day testimony from Jerome Powell. And I heard from one end, the questions posed by Congress. From the other hand, I heard what Jerome Powell thinks about many topics. Very humble guy. Whatever he doesn't know, he says he doesn't know. Whatever he thinks he knows, he talks about the fact that he thinks he knows that. And he's always saying we are constantly learning and we are constantly getting things wrong with the Fed. The one thing that I thought was eerie a little bit was the calmness with which he talked about the fact that himself and other economists are brushing off basically any short-term worries about the U.S. dollar as the role of reserve currency. He says, look, it's a concern, but it's so much down the road that it's not something I take into effect when I make decision. Nobody seems to be questioning that there are alternatives popping up in the foreseeable future, not something that's way, way down the road. And on the flip side, he talks about the fact that Washington is on an unsustainable path with regards to its spending. What can the Federal Reserve even do if Washington continues to issue bonds? And what can the Fed do outside of what it does, outside of monetizing debt? Is it the Fed's role, in your opinion, to criticize the federal government for spending? Where does this come in? Because as a central bank, they cannot be so out of touch on one hand with the problem and just be monetizing debt for the federal government. Where is the Fed independence in all of this? What do you think about this topic?
Oh, okay. You need to go back to physics to understand that. If you can think of a top spinning, as it slows down, it wobbles and wobbles and wobbles and then crashes. If you think about a bullet leaving the barrel of a gun, when it leaves the barrel, its behavior is very predictable. When it gets to the end of its range, then it starts wobbling and it crashes. Basically, all things get worse with time. Any rational person would recognize the U.S. as an end of empire. It's not even a question of the U.S. dollar, okay? It's a question of the U.S. empire. It's ended. We have bankrupted this country, fighting wars that we cannot possibly win, that have no particular objective in mind. And we're doing things that are so silly. I'm sure you followed Turkey and the S-400 system from Russia. Turkey was supposed to get the F-35, which is supposed to be the best fighter in the world, and it's not. It's a piece of crap. And they are angry with the United States because Erdogan blames the United States for being against the coup d'etat against him. So they get in bed with the Russians and they buy the Russian anti-aircraft system, the S-400. Well, if they have both the F-35 and the S-400, they could figure out how to make the S-400 shoot down the F-35. And that's something the U.S. doesn't want people to know. But it's end of empire. Our submarines don't work. Our aircraft carriers don't work. Our destroyers cost so much money that you can only build 3 or 4 when you're supposed to build 30 or 40. It's end of empire. Every empire ends the same way. They get dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber. And there isn't anything you can do about it. Clearly, you can look at the East. China and Russia are going to be very important in the world 20 or 30 years from now. And the United States is not going to be nearly as important.
Well, and the UN has posted some very nice stats regarding the largest GDP projections. And by 2030, not only does China become the world's #1 economy based on GDP, but India is going to rival the US for second. And then you have a country that many people don't even know is strong, Indonesia, which is projected to become the 3rd largest economy GDP-wise by 2045. It's a huge change, like you say. And I want to ask you regarding Powell. Let's continue on this theme. Powell has to also consider, just as Trump does, what other countries are doing with their currency. It's not like the United States is an island, and it has to either match or work against what other countries are doing to weaken their currency. Do you think it's a smart idea for the U.S. to weaken its currency in order to become a more competitive exporter in the industries that are very easy to compete with? If you're trying to make the dollar cheaper so you can export more commodities, which other countries can compete with the U.S. very easily, instead of focusing your resources on finding the best means to allow the citizens to gain skills that are not that simple to copy. You know, there aren't many countries with so much talent in tech and in industries that require a lot of bright minds. And I wonder, what do you think about the U.S. strategically? What should it focus on? Should it focus on weakening its currency, or should it focus on quality and industries that are not that easy for other countries with insufficient education to compete with them?
I think I'm an equal opportunity anarchist. I despise all governments equally. The concept that governments can do a better job of running the economy than individuals can operating in their own self-interest, I just don't believe that. Every government, starting with the USSR and Communist China, when they try to run their economy from the very top, it never works. What you need to do is set up a reasonable tax structure. You need to have defensible borders. You need to mind your own business. You need to create a business environment in which people are allowed to succeed. And then you let people do what they're good at. We, on the other hand, have transferred more and more and more power to big government. And quite bluntly, in a day of the internet, you do not need big government. Individuals can make better decisions by and for themselves. And we're creating this incredible dichotomy in the United States between the rich and the poor. and the 1% have gotten about 80% of the benefit since 2008, and the 99% are getting very angry. We are set up for, at the very least, a civil war, and at most a revolution. And actually, and I did say this in my latest book, I think there will be a worldwide revolution. We've got to sort out the value of money. And the idea that every country should get involved in devaluing their own currency, I think it's a flawed example of economics. You've got to have a secure currency with a sustainable value that keeps its value. And that's why gold worked for thousands of years. And people poo-poo gold, but the US dollar has lost 98% of its value since the Federal Reserve came in 1913, and most countries have done worse than that. That's insane. We've got $13 trillion in negative interest rates. Italy, which is a serial bankrupt, has negative interest rate bonds. Now that's simply insane.
You know, I agree with you so much with regards to the government should let the economy run itself, but I'm also very interested in reality and things that can be done right now, and in things that the population of a given country wants. It almost seems like, Bob, you know, I want your thoughts on this. It almost seems like most Americans now believe that the government is the initiator in the economy and not them. They're not trying to.
That is absolutely correct, and that's the fatal flaw. Until 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, do you have any idea of what federal government most Americans had the most interconnection with?
I don't. I know that in books that I've read on the time, you know, at the early part of the Republic, people didn't even know the name of the federal president in Washington.
It's funny because they didn't need to, but the only interaction between average citizens in 1913 and the federal government was the post office. Federal government has now turned into this octopus that makes decisions that affect all of us all of the time. And you just can't do it. I think that Switzerland has one of the very best governments in the world. And the really funny thing is, I can't actually explain how it works. I just know that it works. And if you have some bright idea, and you can get 50,000 signatures on a petition, it will be taken for a vote, no matter how daft the idea. And if it passes the vote, then it's put into law. I think that decisions should be made at the lowest level. When I was a kid, all school decisions were made at the local city level. And then it was at the state level, and now it's the federal level. And I'll be candid, I mean, the further you get away from ordinary people, the more clueless the government is. And you could certainly see it with these 20 candidates the Democrats have right now. And I'm not trying to suggest Democrats are good and Republicans are bad or vice versa, but we've got 20 Democrats, and they're absolutely clueless. They have some of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard about, and nobody ever talks about the real issue. Let's talk about student debt. I think student debt is 1.6 trillion. And one of the very popular ideas from the Democrats is we're going to relieve the students of this unconscionable debt that they cannot get rid of in bankruptcy. So we will take the chains off them. But what they don't say is they're not going to eliminate the debt. they're just going to transfer the debt to the backs of the American taxpayers. So instead of not taxing you, instead of getting you to pay back your $38,000 in student loans after you get your first job, we'll wait for a year or two and then we can share it with all of your neighbors. That's a situation where the bankers literally bribed Congress and said, we want to give loans, but we don't want to take any risk in these loans. So we want to make sure you cannot discharge this in bankruptcy. So as a result, tuition increased eightfold. People are taking courses in underwater basket weaving. They're getting degrees in things that are absolutely meaningless. They're going out in the job market, and the job market's saying, you don't have any skills, you don't have any knowledge that we can use, and we're not going to pay you very much. We have totally distorted our economy, and actually what we did is we handed this to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world did the same thing. The rest of the world used to be on a cash and carry basis. Now they're on a borrow and spend basis, and every government in the world is functionally bankrupt. We need to reset the $250 trillion in debt that we know is not going to get paid. We need to go back to a stable currency that has some value, and we need to get government off the backs of ordinary people.
Let's talk about the world we currently live in at the moment, with all governments operating, as you say, systemic deficit spending regimes. There's literally no government that has, outside of very few, that don't have large deficits year after year after year as part of the system. And that's due to population demographics that caught them way underfunded to handle, especially when it comes to retirement. You can raise taxes enough to cover this without blowing up the economy. So what's happening in the last 10 years is these monetary policies have elevated stock prices, real estate prices, since the yields on bonds are, as you say, they're negative. It also made it hard for millions of people to keep up with the rising prices. I've heard the idea of a debt jubilee floating. What do you think about this idea?
Well, one of the things that I've never heard anybody discuss except me, and I'm not saying it's because I'm so bright, it's because I don't spend very much time listening to other people. All debt gets paid. It is not the amount of taxes that a government raises that's important. If the government spends money, they have to raise it somehow. And they can raise it in one of three ways. They can raise it in taxation, either direct or indirect. They can raise it in inflation, which is a tax, or they can default, which is a debt jubilee. Now, here's what's simple. All debt gets paid. It gets paid either by the borrower or it gets paid by the lender. And nobody wants to address that issue, because what it means is if your government spends too much money and they bankrupt you, then something bad is going to happen. And I hate to be a Cassandra, a predictor of doom and gloom. But if you remember Cassandra, everything that she predicted came true. We need to reset the everything bubble. We need to go back to basic economics 101, where people create things of value and they sell them at a profit, and the taxation rate is low enough that they can do that. And we need to stop thinking of government as some kind of obscene cornucopia of free shit. It isn't. There is no such thing as free shit. Somebody's got to pay for it.
Bob, what I really want to follow up on this. What do you think, in light of this, if you are a citizen in such a country that handles itself in that manner, in a manner that doesn't benefit your own lifestyle, your own values and principles. What do you do? What are your options if you are the minority in a country that doesn't function the way you want?
Well, since November 17th of 2018, the yellow vests in France, primarily in Paris, but in other cities too, have been out protesting every single weekend. That is going to occur all over the world. Now, it's wonderful when somebody in the government comes down that says, look, we're going to give you free this and free education and free health care and free Obama phones. Somebody's got to pay for it. And what's happened is in France, and I live in a little tiny village in France, is that people have moved out of the small villages to the big cities where the jobs are. And the number of small businesses in the rural areas have been absolutely devastated. The farmers are living on peanuts, and they've got the whole farming community so out of whack because of the 37,000 bureaucrats in the EU. Government functions best when there is the least government, because face it, people go to work for the government because they're too lazy to work and too nervous to steal. So what you do is you give these idiots as little power as possible, and you take some responsibility for your own life. Now, in a society where there is no free health care and where there is no free unemployment benefits and there is no free shit, people take care of each other. And we could easily go back to that because, quite bluntly, all of the governments in the world that I'm aware of are dysfunctional and in a state of failure. And there is going to be a giant change, and I think it's going on right now. We don't recognize it yet, but we need to get into talking about the stock market soon, because I think we're going to have the crash, the mother of all crashes, come October.
Well, let's talk about these two things then. Let's talk about what's going on in the stock market. The S&P 500 just passed the 3,000 point mark. If the Fed cut rates in July, there has never been a time where the U.S. economy was not in a recession, and the Fed cut rates and the markets did not gain. In other words, in every instance where the Fed cuts rates into a growing economy, the markets gain. And so I want to get your take on what do you think is happening with the markets. You told me off the air you think October is going to be meaningful. Tell us a little bit about that. And also, while you're on it, you really are against Bitcoin. I want to ask you what you think about it in light of what's happening in 2019 and in light of the fact that Trump is talking about it. The Jerome Powell in the two-day testimony, he was asked on the second day, every third question was about Libra. It was just incredible, the amount of questions that were posed regarding the Facebook project. So
yeah, I mean, if there was ever an argument against shitcoin or Bitcoin, as I call it, it would be turning over the currency to Facebook and Zuckerberg. He just got a $5 billion fine, biggest fine in SEC history, and he smiled. Let's go to the stock market. Where do avalanches start? Do they start in the valley?
Sorry, no. They start with one little snowflake.
But where does it start?
Oh, not in the valley, no.
What would be the opposite of the valley?
The higher echelons of the mountain.
The peak.
Yes.
Okay. You do not start an avalanche from the valley. You start it from the peak. Now, the government, and certainly Trump, is looking at an increase of the Dow and the S&P and saying it's a good thing. But Trump's in the 1%. He's looking out for the 1%. it doesn't make a rat's ass to the 99% what the Dow and the S&P do, because they don't own any shares and they don't get any value out of it. The economies around the world are slowing down, and in some cases almost stopping. And certainly from a fundamental point of view, the Dow and the S&P do not reflect reality. What they do is reflect an earthquake in motion, and the water is all slushing to one side of the pool. And that pool benefits the 1%, but it doesn't benefit the 99%. And the 99% are getting more and more pissed. But what I see happening is in the nature of a melt-up. I think it will go on through August, perhaps into early September. If you go back to September of 1929, the Dow actually peaked, I think, on September 5th, and then it declined into October and it crashed at the end of October. I believe, and I think that Bitcoin is showing stress in the system. I think gold ramping up $150 is showing stress in the system. Everybody's oohing and eyeing about the S&P and the Dow, but I think it's dangerous. I think it'll peak in August or September, and it will crash in October. And it will be recognized as the everything bubble bursting.
So I want to ask you. Let's talk about gold. We seem to have entered a bull market. Judging by history, what can we expect in your expertise if the Fed does start a rate cut policy that could even take us to zero rates in the U.S.?
It could take us to negative rates. Okay, I mean, if those idiots in Italy can have negative rates, why can't we? But going to gold, we've had this really interesting situation in the last 2 months where the price of gold shot up, just like Bitcoin did, and then gold has kind of stabilized. And today, as we're talking, silver and platinum are starting to play a catch-up game. We had quite a dichotomy because silver and platinum didn't move and gold moved very strongly. The sentiment indicators for gold and the sentiment indicators from the Commitment of Traders report says a correction is due. In my opinion, and it's in great big quotation marks because I easily could be wrong, my opinion is we're going to have one more lap run higher and then a correction. We've got way too many bulls right now, and the bulls are never right. They're always buying at tops and selling at bottoms. So I think one more correction, and should the stock market and bond market crater in October, as I believe, there will be a rush to safety and people will recognize that the precious metals are money and are secure and are safe. I think we're going to see a bubble in gold, silver, platinum that will eclipse what happened in the stock market, what happened in real estate, and what happened in Bitcoin.
So, Bob, you talked about before about the fact that it should be the free markets that help to correct any imbalances in the economy, in the market, etc. And I agree with you regarding that. But I want to ask you: do you think that there is a will? Do you think that there is a recognition of the fact that the wealth gap and the income gap in the U.S. is actually a problem that could affect society negatively? Do you think it is a problem that could affect the economy and society negatively? And what do you think should be done and by whom to shrink the gap, if at all? So, just your thoughts in general regarding this topic, income inequality and wealth inequality. Countless studies have shown that when you reach an extreme point with income inequality or wealth inequality, education suffers, crime levels go up, incarceration levels go up. There's all sorts of things happen. But I want to ask you, are we at that point? And
Yeah.
what are some
Yeah.
possible solutions via either business leadership or the government, both as some sort of a collaboration? What do you think about this topic in general?
Strange enough, you just made the argument for me, and you expressed it very eloquently. When the dichotomy between rich and poor gets to be too high, you get a revolution, and clearly there appears to be an incipient civil war in progress in the United States that frankly scares me, but it easily could turn into a revolution. Now, one of the things that nobody discusses, and we should at least mention, if the $250 trillion in debt, that we know it's not going to get paid. We know it. Everybody that ever passed Economics 101 knows it. The issue is who suffers if it doesn't get paid. And the fact is that Social Security is going to suffer, Medicare is going to suffer, Medicaid is going to suffer, pensions are going to suffer. But the ordinary citizens of the United States have allowed the people supposedly representing them to get totally out of control financially. They have spent themselves into a deep hole. There is no solution for getting out of it. They can either raise taxes to 150%, or they can default, or they can inflate it to infinity. And all of those are negative solutions. We have bad times coming. It's a good time to not be in debt. It's a good time to be secure, even to the point of keeping extra food. Certainly, I look at what's going on in the United States in the farming communities, and we're going to have a food issue this year. We've had way too much flooding. The crops are in terrible shape. We have entropy has taken over, and there are bad times coming. It's just that simple.
Bob, I want to ask you in closing. We're just about out of time, and I want to ask you about the work you do. Where can people find some of your work, the books, everything like that, for people who want to know more and listen to more and follow you?
Of course, 321 Gold and 321 Energy. Those are my primary websites. But one thing that would be very interesting would be for anybody who's interested in what I've got to say. I wrote a book in January. I actually predicted this would be the year of the bursting of the everything bubble. And it's called Basic Investing in Resource Stocks. Go to Amazon, put my name in, and if you take a look at the reviews, there's about 45 reviews total between England, Canada, the United States, Australia, Germany, India. And it's the highest rated book that I've ever seen. And if you just read the reviews, you're going to realize, hey, that's a pretty good book. I surprised myself with the book, but the reaction of readers to it has been very positive. And I think, for $12 or whatever it costs, I think it's a pretty good deal.
Bob, let me ask you something that I want to ask before we wrap up. I didn't touch on it before, but I really want to get your opinion. If you can summarize the last 3 years of Trump's time in office, what would you say his biggest success was and his biggest mistake?
Well, his biggest success is He's not Hillary Clinton. And it's the biggest mistake. He is Donald Trump.
Do you want to elaborate on any of these?
Well, Hillary Clinton is so crooked that when she kicks the bucket, they're going to have to screw her into the ground. If you look at Epstein and what's going on there, if you look at the coup d'etat against Trump, you know, the FBI and the DOJ and the CIA decided they were the guys who should pick who is going to be president. I don't think any country in history has ever advanced from that point. I think things only got worse from there. And Trump does not appeal to the good in people. He appeals to the evil, nasty side. And something that certainly affects you, and I wish we had more time to talk about it. I think the biggest mistake the United States has made in geopolitics is to get involved in the Middle East. I think that it's the United States acting as a catalyst that has created so much hate and discontent. And what we have done is we have armed all the nutcase Christians, nutcase Muslims, and nutcase Jews. If the United States would leave Israel alone to sort out its own problems, I think Israel would be reasonable. But the degree of control over the United States Congress is pretty scary to me. I mean, that's just a really bad idea.
Bob, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time doing the interview. Let's reconvene in October. Obviously.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute. You know, I could be wrong about that. Let's reconvene if I'm right.
That's fine. So 321gold.com. The books are all on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, the books are on Amazon. Bob Moriarty, thank you very much for taking the time today.
Good deal. Hey, thanks, Lior. It's good talking to you.